Hey guys, this is Jen, the Liberty Lion, and today I'm looking at Vattel, the Law of Nations. And Vattel was from France, or he was a Frenchman anyway, and he talks about the natural law and the law of nations. The law of nations is mentioned in the federal constitution for the United States, or I should say, of the United States for the United States of America. And I've mentioned in a few of my videos about the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution and how they are attached to one another, that you cannot have a constitution unless you first have a confederacy of the states. This is also mentioned in a few other federal documents that are fairly easy to find. I've put links to them in some of my other videos where I've talked about the Confederacy and the Constitution. There is no law that repeals or replaces the Articles of Confederation. Some people have claimed that the Constitution does that, but the Constitution does not do that because it would specifically state that the Articles of Confederation are hereby repealed and or replaced by this Constitution. It doesn't say that. As a matter of fact, the preamble states that the Constitution was to create a more perfect union, the first union being the Confederacy. The Confederacy created the United States of America and allowed them to assemble as a Congress. So the United States of America and Congress assembled was created, or mentioned, I should say, by the Articles of Confederacy. The Articles of Confederacy also stated that they then created the United States and Congress assembled, being the Federal Republic, which was written in the Constitution. And we have documents that state that the delegates could not form a new union, that they had to amend the Articles of Confederation to include the Federal Republic. The Constitution stuff, the meat of the Constitution is actually already written basically in the Articles of Confederation, but the amendment called the Constitution lined it out in a more organized manner. So the two are attached. You first have a firm league of friendship of free, sovereign, and independent states, and then they create a federal republic. So in Vattel, the Law of Nations, he says, and this is page 84, Book 1, Nations in Themselves. So each of the states may be a nation. Some people would agree, some people would disagree. But Vattel says, finally, several sovereign and independent states may unite themselves together by a perpetual confederacy. And we know that the Articles of Confederation calls itself a confederacy, which is also called a firm league of friendship, and that the union is perpetual. So by a perpetual confederacy, a perpetual friendship, without ceasing to be, each individually, a perfect state. They will together constitute a federal republic. Their joint deliberations will not impair the sovereignty of each member, though they may, in certain respects, put some restraint on the exercise of it in virtue of voluntary engagements. A person does not cease to be free and independent when he is obliged to fulfill engagements which he has voluntarily contracted. So, a person does not cease to be free and independent when he is obliged to fulfill engagements which he has voluntarily contracted, such as being a member of the militia. So free and independent would mean that he is a private citizen so free and independent. And when he joins the militia and works for a federal republic as a private under the service of the military state or the federal republic, he, for a temporary time, has voluntarily contracted himself. Also, the commissioned officers voluntarily contract themselves to become commissioned officers serving in the military on military posts. They are still free and independent, and they can always leave, but they are bound to serve out their contract. There are ways of getting out of a contract. As far as I know, it would be called a writ. Exactly how that would be done, I'm unsure of right now at this point. But I did read in the Maxims of Law that a writ can, I forget the exact wording, but it can basically undo a contract that you're in. And we know that military people who sign a contract and agree to a term of service, years, can get out of that contract providing they write a writ of some sort of conflict of interest, meaning that they can no longer do their job in the military because their interests don't align with what the military is doing. For example, when they started fighting in Afghanistan, some military members ended their contract with the military because they did not believe in what the government was doing in Afghanistan. Tom Woods has talked to a few of these people, and I've had them on his show where he talked about how they got out of their contract. I'm not sure that they called it a writ, but Maxims of Law does call it a writ. Let's see, there may be certain respects, put some restraint on the exercise of it, the exercise of sovereignty and independence. So the federal constitution shows that the states can't interfere with the federal military functions. And that's basically everything that the federal government is doing on the federal lands. Under the Constitution, a federal republic, their lands are mentioned in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, where it talks about the lands that the government has, the seat and places purchased, and that they're supposed to be used for defense purposes. Then that's, of course, defense spelled with a C, not an S. And that they have the right to make laws for those areas, and that the states won't interfere with those things. So the states did not give up their sovereignty, and Vattel acknowledges that in his Law of Nations. And it's also acknowledged in the Constitution that a federal republic does not remove the Confederacy, and it does not remove the sovereignty and freedom of the people, and it does not remove the sovereignty of the state or each of the members being the states or the people in the states. And that's also written in, I think it's Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation, that even though they have a federal republic, that the states shall remain free, sovereign, and independent, with the exception of the things that they have given up to the federal government, which is to basically not interfere what the federal government is doing on the federal lands. So the state will not force the military post inside of it to use a state currency, because they use a federal currency, and that federal currency is money, lawful money, called gold and silver. I don't believe that it means that the states will also use the gold and silver, but that the states won't interfere with the federal government using gold and silver, and that the states won't interfere with the federal government's right to commerce, meaning the federal government moving goods in between all the military posts and in between the military posts in different states. But that's not to say that the federal government is going to interfere with the state's right to control their own commerce. So all these licenses to drive from the legal state, where we contract with the legal state because we're contracting with the legal state for a license, increases the wealth of the federal state through the Federal Reserve Bank or the IRS for taxation purposes, the Social Security for them taking money out of our checks, and so on and so forth. It increases their wealth, and it's a contract, and all contracts are voluntary. There is no such thing as a contract by force. It's not a contract if it's by force. So everything is voluntary. And one person cannot volunteer another person. So this idea that majority can make a vote and rule over the minority is, if you look at it in certain light, is kind of ridiculous, because you can't force another person into a contract, just like the Federal Reserve Bank cannot force you into the contract. They can only lie to get you to agree, and their lie is that you have to, it's the law, or quote, you have to, it's the law, end quote. There is no law to contract, because if there was a law to contract, the law is force and has the right to use force, and contracts cannot be by force, otherwise they're not contracts. They're something else. And you can't use force against people in a free society. So if this is a free society, which is the purpose of the Constitution for a federal republic, if we're a free society, then what is the purpose of the Constitution? The purpose of the Constitution is to keep us free, sovereign, and independent, to defend the Confederacy, to defend the sovereignty of the states and the free, sovereign, and independent people of those states. That's the entire purpose of a federal republic, because it creates a military to defend what it has, which is basically what the Law of Nations talks about in this book. And I'll go to the front so you can see the front. It's vital. Law of Nations, mentioned in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Oh, I think it says something like obedience to the law of nations or something to that effect. Natural law and Enlightenment classics, the law of nations or principles of the law of nature, applied to the conduct and affairs of nations and sovereigns, with 3 early essays on the origin and nature of natural law, and on luxury, Emer Devotel. Liberty Fund Annapolis is, I think the people who reprinted this is a very interesting symbol here. Means Amagi, and Amagi means freedom. And also in an ancient culture, I think it was Sumerian or Sumerian, I forget how to say it, meant to return to mother. Return to mother. So when you returned to mother, you left sort of the tyranny and debt and all the bad things created by men, and you went back to your mother or your motherland, which I think has some connection with the right of return, the right to return to where your mother was from, her country, the motherland. So you leave the place that your father created, and men create these tyrannical governments, or seem to anyway. And I'm not saying that Hillary Clinton wasn't a man. Maybe she was on the inside to some effect mentally, because she was fairly tyrannical human being. And some women have very masculine minds. And so when it says return to mother, I don't think they're necessarily talking about the actual mother, but the idea of mother, the idea of returning back to start over again. Like some people call it the Jubilee. So the Sumerians called it Amagi, or mother, or modernly they call it Magi. Okay, so this is the Law of Nations, and we're talking about the Federal Republic, the Constitution, the Federal Republic, that the Articles of Confederation acknowledge that all the states are free, sovereign, and independent, and remain so. And the creation of the Constitution did not repeal or replace the Articles of Confederation. And if you check out my video on the enacting clauses, you'll see that the Articles of Confederation have an enacting clause of the United States of America in Congress assembled, and the federal government, meaning the military part or the federal state, the constitutional Federal Republic, as mentioned in this book, has a United States in Congress assembled, not a United States of America in Congress assembled, though both are mentioned in the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution uses the United States in Congress assembled. However, all laws created by the Congress of the United States, not United States of America, use the enacting clause United States of America in Congress assembled instead of United States in Congress assembled, yet they're using the Constitution as its law source instead of the Articles of Confederation. So if they're using the enacting clause United States of America in Congress assembled, they should be using the Articles of Confederation. And if they're acting as United States in Congress assembled, they should be using the Constitution. And the Constitution applies to the federal people on the federal lands, and the Articles of Confederation is the states, the free, sovereign, and independent states, and the people. So they're using the Constitution as their source of law, but they're using the enacting clause that would logically be the enacting clause for the Articles of Confederation. And you can watch my video on the enacting clause that I created. And I spent a lot of time doing it, putting that together so that people could understand what an enacting clause is and how the Articles of Confederation simply must exist because they're using the enacting clause of the Articles of Confederation, and the assembly of the Articles of Confederation being the United States of America in Congress assembled. Okay, so hopefully you understand this. Hopefully I was able to convey the information in a way that was easy for you to understand. That's my hope anyway. And the goal of this channel is freedom, sovereignty, independence, and truth and knowledge. So please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, clicking the bell notification, leaving a comment or a question. I try to at least acknowledge that I've seen everyone's comments. Sometimes I don't always get the notifications that someone has made a comment, and so after a while I go back in and I check, and I go through all the comments section and at least like people's comments to let them know that I have read your comment. I think people like that. I know I like that when I'm on someone else's YouTube channel. I like to know that they at least have seen my comment. So anyway, like, share, subscribe, keep in touch, and no matter what happens in the future, hopefully we'll all still be able to keep in touch with one another and help each other out in one form or another.